And thank you very much for having me, Thabo.
Well, I suppose this conversation is born out of what we are hearing coming out of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, particularly their testimonies being given by the chairpersons of portfolio committees. But, of course, it's a question that has been in existence for a while, even before the Commission, whenever we were seeing, for example, SIU reports being issued and Parliament literally just sitting on them and doing nothing, and as far as holding those who should be brought to account. Now, the question broadly is that system not working, and therefore it needs to be relooked? Let's start there.
Yeah, Thabo, I think your question and your introduction is absolutely 100% spot on. I think the reason I wrote this article, which was published in a publication, was arising out of the evidence given at the Zondo Commission. And I think it was very rich of some of those people to go there years after, the portfolio committees were given certain responsibilities, like the Public Enterprises Portfolio Committee, which I sat on, to come along and say, well, we were being obstructed by our own members of our own party. They could have turned to the opposition and asked us to be more vociferous and brought that to our attention at that time. But having said that, I think the system that we have at the moment favors the majority. And we've seen from evidence being given at the Zondo Commission and various other platforms that the majority members of Parliament, being the ANC in the National Assembly, are very loath to ask searching questions of ministers and be very vociferous in committees. Now, the reason I said that, should we paint every MP with the same brush, is that members of the opposition are at pains to ask very, very relevant questions. But most of the time you are shut down by the majority because they have a particular mandate that they come with from the executive. Now, you've just had a very interesting discussion on Nkandla and the Tea Party. Well, I was on the ad hoc committee of Nkandla, and at the very, very first meeting, which had very senior ANC members, I said, members of Parliament, honorable members, let us go for a declaratory order to ascertain what is the role of the public protector and whether remedial action is binding on anybody when a finding is made. That would have been a logical start because that was the whole issue. But they shut that down. And 2 years later, after hundreds of thousands, we came to a conclusion that, yes, the former president did benefit from using state money to improve Nkandla. Now, these are the kind of things where the parliamentary system is such that the majority seem to have their say all the time. And unless we start changing that, perhaps having chairpersons of portfolio committees from the other parties, and perhaps in the next election reducing the majority of the majority party, if they're going to be the majority in the future. I think this is going to happen because members of Parliament in the majority party are beholden to the executive and to their masters.
So from what we are hearing from the previous chair of SCOPA, Themba Godi, to the current chair of SCOPA, Khuleko Hlengwa, of your party, it seems that particular portfolio committee manages to get it right, where decisions are made along bipartisan lines. It's not just one party that has the final say. How do they manage to get it right?
Well, I think, I served on SCOPA for 10 or 12 years myself, and it is one of the committees where I think those members that serve on the committee really realize what their responsibility is to the general public. And they try and carry out their responsibilities fairly without prejudice, although even when I was in the committee, we have had particular challenges where members of the executive would come there and berate their own members on that committee for asking a particular questions. But I think SCOPA has reached a standard of acceptability amongst everybody, that this is a committee where you have to be on the ball, you have to be fair. And I think the good thing about it is that the chairperson of that portfolio committee is a member of the opposition. That doesn't mean that he has any particular advantage, but Nkululeko Hlengwa has a way of bringing together all the members of that portfolio committee. And I think that is why that committee is so successful. But Thabo, if you look at any committee in Parliament, in fact, when the Eskom debacle started and we began to fathom out that things were not right in Eskom, I suggested years ago that we use our rules, the rules of Parliament as it pertains to committees, to carry out a thorough investigation into Eskom. Now, for that to happen, you need Parliament as an institution to support your committee with additional resources, both financial and human resources, evidence leaders, etc. So I think this is where Parliament is failing portfolio committees, because portfolio committees can carry out the responsibility of interrogating any department, any state-owned enterprise, and that is not happening. Right. That is being left to commissions and being left to NGOs, etc.
All right, we heard two testimonies today, one from the former chair portfolio committee of transport and one from the chair of the portfolio on correctional services. And their testimony at the commission says, one says, well, look, I was there because of the party brought me there, and so I told the party line. But what was interesting about Vincent Smith's testimony, which of course I'll paraphrase, is not exactly what he said, but he seems to be saying, well, we were simply an advisory committee. You know, basically, we don't really have power to tell these people what to do. Two, we also had very limited resources as opposed to carry out things like inquiries and so on and so forth. Is that your experience?
Well, I think on the question of resources, that is my experience. Because, you know, Parliament committees meet, they sit for 3 hours, they just go through the agenda and that's it, end of story. We should be interrogating departments thoroughly. That is our responsibility as portfolio committees. And for that, you need the resources. But you know, listening to what you've said, Thabo, about we don't have powers, I think that is completely wrong. I mean, Parliament is an arm of state, and Parliament, through its committees, can make recommendations to the House, which are adopted and become binding on the executive. And the executive need to follow up on House resolutions. So it's incorrect to say that we are advisory to a sense. We do have the powers, but I think those powers are being curtailed because of the system that we are operating in.
Now, looking at all the other, I suppose, institutions that should be supporting your work and making your work easier, for example, like the SIU, and when you get reports like that, not only that, you've got members of the media who are also reporting on these things. These things were brought to Parliament via these media reports, and even the commission chair saying, but these things were being widely reported. Why doesn't Parliament look further into those reports and do their investigations?
Sure. Well, you see, it comes again to the majority. The majority party cover up these things. You know, I've been long enough in Parliament, over 30 years now, to know, Thabo, that when we sit in portfolio committees, you get members of the ruling party being ultra critical of departments and ministers in terms of the budgets that are presented. But let those same members go into Parliament where we debate and we take House resolutions. They would wax lyrical of the minister and the department. And this is because, you know, you play to your masters. You are appointed by a political party. That political party is in power and in government. So you listen to them to a large extent. There are very few members of Parliament, I think, in the majority, who've really, you know, bucked the system to say, and gone outside to say, well, we are now critical. One was Professor Ben Turok, Honorable Turok, bless his soul, who was extremely critical of the way things were happening in Parliament. And unless we have a system where members of Parliament can represent their constituencies and the people on the ground and not political parties per se, then we are going to continue to have this, leaning on the side of your political party and overlooking certain things along the way.
All right, IFP Member of Parliament, then Narend Singh, appreciate your time.